Today we're going to be learning about another new fly in our beginners class. And this fly is named Beck's Beetle. And it's named after Kathy Beck, Kathy being the woman in the family, Barry and Kathy Beck, who have been involved in fly fishing for decades. One of the reasons why I picked Beck's Beetle, which I hope you can see here in front of me, is that we want to give honor to Kathy Beck, who has agreed to be one of our advisory committee or advisory board members for the Friends of Lefty Kreh initiative. But also, being that this is the time of year when some of the more terrestrial insects, such as ants and beetles and moths and crickets and other things, begin to show themselves, Beck's Beetle would be a very good fly to use in fishing for not only trout, but ultimately for bass and some of the larger types of panfish. Kathy ties this normally in the size 6 to 8 hook. However, this fly can be tied at a much smaller hook size and thus represent a smaller beetle by changing the color of the foam and legs. One can make a hopper pattern. Even tied smaller, it would be a small beetle or perhaps an ant. So those are several of the reasons that I chose to use Beck's Beetle as this month's beginner's fly tying session. But it also is going to allow our beginning tyers to learn to work with foam and other synthetic materials such as silicone legs and some of the other materials that are all artificial or synthetic in the design of this fly. And so this is going to help our beginning fly tyers to be more adept at constructing flies with different types of materials and learning to modify basic patterns in order to achieve different results. So I hope you all enjoy this video. Well, let's get started then with tying Beck's Beetle. I've already placed in the hook a size 6 7040 streamer hook. This particular hook is produced by the Saber Fly Hook Company. And so it's described as round bed, down eye, 3x long, bronze. So you can use other similar streamer hooks, but I would advise you to pick hooks that have a wide gap. We're also going to be using some 3mm foam. I've already cut this into the shape of the body of the fly. And we'll be using some angel hair for the wing of the fly and some sparkle braid, which will be used as the overwing, so to speak, to provide a little bit of sparkle to the wing of the wing of the fly. And two other ingredients. One will be some black Australian possum dubbing. It's not necessary that you use possum dubbing, but I chose this because I like the way it works. And the last thing would be silicone legs, which I purchased from the Fly Shack in New York. And the particular color here is black with blue flake in it. So this whole fly has basically a black coloration to it. And so then, therefore, I'm going to be using some black thread. So let's get started on this. First, I'm going to start the thread just immediately behind the eye of the hook and wrap it back to the bend. Clipping off the excess thread. Next, I'll take some dubbing and apply it to the thread. Pulling out a small clump. And taking small bundles at a time, and if you are not already familiar with how to dub thread, you always put it on in one direction. And so I tend to wrap my dubbing on in a counterclockwise direction, using pressure between my fingers. And you can create a nice long noodle that way. That's what we refer to dubbing that's on the thread as it being a long noodle. And then we're going to use this to build up the body. So I've applied that dubbing now to the thread. I slide it up slightly to start right at the bend of the hook. And I'm applying that dubbing and bringing it forward to build up a body. Now, as you can see, it's going to take more than one application of the dubbing on the thread in order to get enough of the abdomen of this fly constructed. And so I'm going to continue to apply the dubbing noodle to the shank of the hook and continuing forward until I get about 2/3 of the way. I still need another application of dubbing. By the way, most dubbings these days are sort of artificial in the way they're made. They're not truly from animal fur, although they will have some animal hair in it if it's coarse dubbing. Dry fly dubbing is more synthetic than natural, except for beaver. And so now I'm almost 2/3 of the way. I'm just going to put a little bit more on there. Okay, so notice that my thread is now hanging about 1/3 of the way back from the eye of the hook. The next thing we're going to do is to apply this foam material that I've already cut to size. It's approximately 2.5 inches long, and I have punctured 2 holes in this foam, and they are about 1/4 of an inch apart. And the first hole will be lined up with right now where my thread is lying or hanging. And so what I want to do is I'm going to slip this foam over the hook where the thread is hanging, and then I'm going to pull it up and insert the eye of the hook through the second hole. So now, to just sort of, if it's difficult for you to envision this, the abdomen of the fly, or the wing in this particular case, the wing of this fly is sitting over the abdomen, and then the foam goes underneath where the thorax is and then comes out. The foam comes off the top, which will ultimately be used to create the head on the fly. Now that I have that in place, I can hold this secure with my thumb and fingers, make several wraps, pulling down, which is going to draw the foam together. Several more wraps, it's going to create a tighter thorax region, leaving some of this extended beyond the eye of the hook, because when that's folded back, it will constitute the head of the fly. Now, I'm going to bring my thread wraps back prior to putting in wing material, but before I do that, I want to secure this, the abdomen, or which constitutes really the wing of the fly. I'm going to secure that down with a little bit of super glue. And you don't need to use very much super glue. Just place some on the underside of the foam right along the top, and then press down on the foam. Hold it there in place for a few seconds, and that should help hold that foam down in place. Might have been more efficient if I had put the adhesive on the on the foam itself, and so I'll do that again. And then lay that down. So that should help. The next thing I'm going to do is put in some of this sparkle, what I call it's called sparkle lash, but I would generally refer to it as sparkle yarn or sparkle flash. I'm going to tie some of this in. I'm going to take about perhaps 5 or 6 strands, clip off a piece that's about 2 inches long, and wrap that around the thread. Bring it up on top, make several thread wraps over the base of that. And then clip off the excess just about at the length of the foam. And then while holding that down, lash it in place with several thread wraps. Now you should see that the sparkle material is laying back over the wing of the fly towards the rear. Okay. The next component that we're going to put in is going to be a piece of this. Basically, this is a synthetic material also, sometimes referred to as sparkle yarn. This particular one that I have is another brand, but to give you some idea, this would be Ultra Hair. It's also referred to as Polar Bear Flash. That is sold by Klauser Fly Shop. And then Hook and Hackle also has one which is called Super Hair White. So my point here is that you can use any synthetic material to constitute the larger wing on this fly. And so I'm going to show you how we're going to do this, because this basically is going to call for creating a very broad wing in the back. And so I've pretty much sized this to where I want it to be. I've moved my thread forward to about that point, about midway to the eye of the hook. Lay this on, make a wrap over it, actually several wraps. And then bring this back and wrap back over it, which should hold that down very nicely in place. Tugging down on the thread rather than pulling to the side. It's going to apply pressure down on the top. And now you should be able to see how that lays very nicely on top, slightly extending beyond the end of the abdomen of the fly. So at this point, I'm also going to put another drop of super glue right on those threads to hold that all in place and keep it tight together. Now this is probably a good time for me to trim this wing slightly. Well, I shouldn't say wing, this is actually constitutes the head of the fly. I'm going to pull that back, and it's going to hold down this wing material, this poly material. I'm going to bring my thread forward just a little bit here. And bring that back. And I've stopped back right where I've secured the synthetic material right at the back of the thorax, just as we're moving into the abdomen section. Folding that foam back, making several additional thread wraps. Now that I have that in place, I'm going to apply some legs to this. Trim a little bit of this off here that's been sticking. As I mentioned before, the leg material that I chose for this fly, I got this from the Fly Shack in New York, and there's plenty of leg material here to actually be able to construct a number of flies. So I'm going to cut this in half because I do not need the full length. I fold it over, clip it right in the middle, and then if you haven't seen this method for applying legs to flies before, what I do is I wrap one strand around the thread on my side, and then I just pull that right up next to the fly where I want it to go, which is going to be right between the two layers of foam at the front of the fly. Bring it over one more time. Wrap the thread around, wrap the foam around wrap the legs around the thread on this side. Pull it in. And check the location of that. Okay, then several thread wraps to secure that in place. And then I'm going to do what I commonly refer to as an X wrap, and that is I go in front of one of the legs, underneath, and come in front of the other leg, which tends to hold those in place and keep them separated from the rear legs. All right. So we're getting close to being finished with this fly. Just want to make sure that the length of my legs is fine before I clip them off. And I will use a whip finish to complete the fly. Going between the legs on each side with my whip finisher. Just about 2 rotations. It should be just about enough. 2, maybe I'll do a third one. And then I can clip my thread off. Now the next and very last part of the construction of this fly, and I think I'm going to put one more drop of head cement just on the top here to hold everything in place. But as I was about to say, the next thing is to clip the legs to a desired length. Now, what you would find if you were using this fly and you had fully extended legs, first of all, the fly is going to sort of spiral in the air as it's being cast because these legs create sort of a propeller type of motion to the fly. But it's also not necessary because insects such as this don't have legs that are 1.5 inches long. But what you do want to have, if you have a fly where you have basically 4 legs, is you want the two rear pair to be a little bit longer than the front. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull these up, draw them together, and select it. Maybe this would be 1 inch long. And so I'm just going to trim them. By trimming them at the same time, they're going to be the same length. And that's fine. So now I have the rear pair the way I would like it, but the front pair I want a little bit shorter. So I'm going to draw those up and cut them off, perhaps instead of 1 inch, maybe it's more like a 3/4 of an inch. And we'll give that a try and see how that looks. And it still might be a little bit too long. So I'm going to take that up about there. Okay, that's a little bit more to my liking, although one's a little bit longer than the other. Okay, so there we are. We have just completed a Beck's Super Beetle. And now I'm looking forward to going out and fishing with this. Well, I hope that you've enjoyed today's tying session, in which we tied Kathy Beck's Beetle. Now, before we close, I wanted to give you a little bit of a suggestion as to how to fish this. I would normally fish this with a dropper rather than a single fly, unless the fish were really rising a lot and it wasn't suitable to use a dropper. But the great thing about using a floating fly such as Kathy's Beetle is that it not only provides an attractor, but it also provides you with a sight indicator, so that if you're using two flies, and that would be the terrestrial, such as Kathy's Beetle, as your lead fly, and then perhaps 18 inches to, and depending upon the water depth, you might have a dropper, such as a bead-headed nymph or an ant or smaller, a wet fly or a nymph of some sort as your dropper. So it provides you basically with two flies that you are using to get the fish's attention. And many times it's the lead fly, such as Beck's Beetle, that will be what will get the fish's attention, and it may not look quite right to it. And then what's right below it is perhaps a more suitable type of fish food that will get the fish's attention. So there's been many times that I've used a floating terrestrial and had the fish come up and engulf the lead fly, such as the beetle. But there's been probably twice as many times that it's been the dropper that I've caught the fish on. So just another suggestion as to how to fish this fly. And so I hope that you've enjoyed our video today, and I wish you good luck in your fishing. Tight lines.